Hey guys, tonight we're rewinding to ancient Thessaly, where you're choking on dust kicked up by 50 divine cattle fleeing a diaper-clad thief. Picture it, olive groves baking under a merciless sun, cicadas screaming like tiny alarms, and you, sweat plastering your tunic to your back, trying to count stolen cows while a literal god throws a tantrum beside you. Surviving Apollo's cosmic sulk? Unlikely. Mortals have spontaneously combusted for less. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment too. Where's Bedtime finding you tonight? Toronto? Tokyo? A secret moon base? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in Apollo's sun-drenched courtyard. Gold everywhere. Marble so polished you see your bewildered face reflecting back. It reeks of incense and entitlement. 1 minute ago, you were admiring his prize herd, immortal cattle with coats like liquid moonlight, grazing idyllically. Now? Chaos. Hoofprints scar the meadow. Only one clue, tiny, suspiciously adorable footprints leading toward the mountains. Apollo's golden face purples. His fingers tighten on his lyre. You instinctively duck. Mainstream historical fact, Apollo wasn't just a music guy, he was the OG god of prophecy, plagues, and archery. Right now? He's prophesying pain for whoever crossed him. Hermes, he roars. Birds fall mid-flight. A nearby laurel tree withers. You recall the gossip, Hermes, born yesterday, already stole Apollo's sacred herd. The infant trickster somehow bundled 50 cows backward, hoofs facing reverse, to confuse trackers. Quirky tidbit, he paused mid-heist to invent the lyre from a tortoise shell and cow guts. Imagine baby's first felony soundtrack by experimental folk music. Apollo's rage isn't just hot, it's thermonuclear. His chariot, the sun, flickers erratically overhead. You feel sunburn blooming on your neck. Find him, Apollo hisses, shoving a celestial compass into your trembling hand. Or join my next target practice. You trudge toward Mount Silene, sandals crunching gravel. Apollo's radiating heat like a walking furnace. Every shrub you pass crisps to ash. Scholars still argue whether this myth represents seasonal drought or Zeus's passive-aggressive parenting. You're betting on the latter. When you reach Hermes' cave, the newborn god is napping in a cradle, cow-eyed blankets pulled to his chin. Innocent? Please. Apollo kicks the cradle. Hermes yawns, batting starry eyes. Brother! Fancy a lullaby? I composed one earlier, Apollo snatches him mid-sentence. The ensuing god squabble shakes Olympus. Zeus, supreme dad, yawns through their bickering. Hermes offers the lyre as a peace offering. Apollo, momentarily dazzled by the shiny toy, forgets the cows. Typical. But divine justice demands balance. Zeus decrees Apollo's punishment, 1 year of manual labor. Not mining or pottery, shepherding. For the god of the sun, patron of poets and princes, it's the cosmic equivalent of making a CEO scrub toilets. Apollo sputters. Sheep? Their smell alone, Zeus silences him with a thunderclap. Admetus. King of Fairy. Be there by dawn. Apollo deflates like a punctured balloon. You stifle a giggle. Bad idea. His glare promises future immolation. As night falls, Apollo mutters curses under his breath, packing a pathetic satchel, lyre, spare sandals, a vial of emergency ambrosia. You trail him toward Thessaly, the air growing colder, the stars mocking. He trips over a root. Useless mortal terrain, he snarls. You are the horizon where Fairy's humble silhouette waits. No marble. No gold. Just the faint bleating of sheep and the promise of damp wool. Apollo shivers. It's not the chill. It's dread. His divine hands have never touched mud. Or manure. Or a sheep tick. The god of light is about to meet the dark, unglamorous grind of agrarian life. His punishment isn't just servitude, it's utter, soul-crushing boredom. And you? You're his unfortunate shadow. Better pray those sheep are very sleepy. The first thing that hits you, before the smell, before the sound, before the sheer mundanity of it all, is the dust. A thick, beige cloud rises as Apollo's sandals scuff the dirt road leading into Fairy. His nose wrinkles. His golden hair, usually gleaming like a shampoo commercial, is already dulled by the grime hanging in the air. You watch as he lifts a hesitant hand to shield his eyes from the sun, his own sun, as if it, too, has betrayed him by shining on this backwater kingdom. Admetus's palace isn't a palace. Not by divine standards, anyway. It's a sturdy, rectangular building of plain stone, surrounded by olive trees and a low wall that wouldn't stop a determined goat, let alone an invading army. There are no glittering statues of Apollo here. No grand temples. Just a few weathered altars to local gods and a lingering scent of livestock. Mainstream historical fact, Fairy was a real place in Thessaly, known more for its horses than its grandeur. Right now, it smells like damp wool and hay. A guard in a patched tunic eyes Apollo's two clean robes and suspiciously perfect posture. "You the new shepherd?" he asks, scratching his beard. Apollo's jaw tightens. You can practically hear his teeth grinding. "I am Apollo," he says, as if the name alone should make the man collapse into worship. The guard blinks. "Right. Well, Apollo, the sheep don't care." And just like that, the god of music, poetry, and prophecy is handed a wooden staff, rough, splintered, nothing like his polished golden scepter, and pointed toward a sloping field where a flock of sheep graze, oblivious to the cosmic injustice unfolding in their midst. Quirky tidbit, ancient shepherds used to sing to their flocks, believing music kept the animals calm. Apollo, of course, assumes this will be his moment to shine. He clears his throat, plucks a few experimental notes on his lyre, and launches into an epicum about himself. The sheep lift their heads. For a second, you think it's working. Then one coughs. Another chews lazily. A particularly bold returns and wanders off mid-chorus. Apollo's fingers freeze on the strings. His face does something complicated, indignation, disbelief, the slow dawning horror of realizing that sheep are his first true critics. You bite your lip. Hard. Perhaps something simpler, you suggest, as diplomatically as possible. He glares. I composed the Homeric hymns. Yeah, but these guys? You gesture to the flock. They're more ba than bravo. Historians still argue whether this myth was meant to humble the gods or just remind ancient Greeks that even the divine couldn't escape farm work. Right now, it feels like both. By sunset, Apollo's lyre is abandoned in the grass, his divine robes are snagged on brambles, and his expression is that of a man who has just realized he signed up for a year of this. The sheep, meanwhile, have wandered into a nearby thicket and refuse to come out. Are they mocking me? Apollo whispers, staring at the woolly shapes disappearing into the brush. You don't answer. Some questions are better left alone. The dawn chorus doesn't wake you, Apollo's frustrated groan does. You peel your eyes open to find him already standing, glaring at the horizon like the sunrise has personally offended him. Which, considering he is the god who drags the sun across the sky each day, feels a little hypocritical. His fingers flex around the splintered shepherd's staff like he's imagining it's Hermes' neck. Right, he mutters. Sheep! You trail him to the pasture where the flock waits, milling about with the collective intelligence of a sack of rocks. Apollo squares his shoulders, exhales through his nose, and steps forward, only to immediately recoil as his sandal sinks into something warm and squelchy. Mainstream historical fact, ancient shepherds often went barefoot to avoid ruining footwear, but there's no way Apollo's pride would allow that. He stares at his soiled sandal in horror, then at the sheep, who blink back at him with vacant indifference. You, he says, pointing at a particularly shaggy one, are testing me. The sheep chew slowly. Apollo's first attempt at herding involves poetry. He recites an epic verse about the glory of obedience, gesturing grandly toward the open meadow. The sheep, unimpressed, wander in 3 separate directions. His second attempt involves bribery. He digs a handful of ambrosia from his satchel, the food of the gods, and scatters it like birdseed. A single lamb nibbles at it, then spits it out. Quirky tidbit, sheep have excellent memory for faces and can recognize their shepherd's voice, but only if that shepherd doesn't reek of divine entitlement. Apollo's voice, usually capable of bending mortals to his will, earns him nothing but flicking ears and the occasional fart. By midday, he's resorted to chasing them. You watch, torn between pity and second-hand embarrassment, as the god of the sun stumbles through the field, golden hair plastered to his forehead with sweat, robes hitched up to avoid more deposits. The sheep, now convinced this is a game, dart just out of reach. One even pauses to baw directly in his face before bolting. "Why won't you listen?" Apollo yells at the sky. A passing farmer leans on the fence, chewing a stalk of grass. "And eat a dog," he offers. Apollo whirls. "A what?" "Dog." Barks. Nips at their heels. "Does half the work for you?" The farmer eyes Apollo's pristine, now grass-stained robes. "Or, you know. Keep yelling. That's working real well." Apollo's eye twitches. Historians still argue whether this myth was meant to teach patience or just showcase how hilariously bad gods were at manual labor. Right now, it's doing both. As the sun sets, ironically, on Apollo's dignity, the sheep finally gather, not because of his efforts, but because the farmer's actual sheepdog trots over and herds them in 3 efficient minutes. Apollo watches, slack-jawed, as the dog receives a grateful scratch behind the ears while he gets nothing. Back in the ramshackle hut Admetus provided, Apollo collapses onto a straw pallet, staring at the ceiling like it holds answers. Tomorrow, he vows, I master this. Outside, a sheep bleats. It sounds suspiciously like laughter. Apollo's grand plan to master shepherding lasts exactly until dawn, when he realizes sheep don't care about plans. Or gods. Or basic logic. You watch as he stares down at the flock, his brow furrowed like he's trying to decipher an ancient scroll written in nonsense. The sheep stare back, chewing in that slow, judgmental way only livestock can manage. Mainstream historical fact, sheep are social animals with a strict hierarchy, something Apollo, used to Olympian politics, assumes he'll dominate instantly. He strides toward the largest ram, intending to assert dominance. The ram, unimpressed, lowers its head and charges. Apollo dodges, but barely. His sandal catches on a rock, and he goes down hard, elbow deep in mud. The ram trots away, victorious. You bite your tongue so hard you taste blood. Right, Apollo mutters, wiping muck from his robes. New strategy. His next attempt involves bribery, specifically, the handful of figs he swiped from Admetus's kitchens. He holds one out, coaxing. "Come on," he croons. Sweet, juicy, divinely tempting. A youth snatches the fig, and his fingertips, in one quick bite. Apollo yelps. The youth chews thoughtfully, then spits the fig out. Quirky tidbit, ancient shepherds used salt licks to lure sheep, believing it improved their health. Apollo, of course, has no salt. Just bruised pride and a growing suspicion that these creatures are immune to godly charm. By midday, he's resorted to negotiation. "Listen," he says, crouching to eye level with a particularly woolly specimen. "I move the sun. You move 4 feet to the left. Surely we can." The sheep walks away mid-sentence. Apollo groans, flopping onto his back in the grass. Above him, his own sun blazes mockingly. Historians still argue whether this myth symbolizes humanity's struggle against nature or just Zeus's twisted sense of humor. Right now, it's definitely the latter. As dusk falls, Apollo finally stumbles upon a breakthrough. Sheep follow sound. Not his lyre, tested, failed, not his voice, ignored, but the rhythmic thunk of his staff against the earth. He taps. A few ears twitch. He taps again. Like magic, the flock begins to amble in his direction. For the first time in days, Apollo grins. Ah! Finally. A gust of wind blows his hat into a thorn bush. The sheep, startled, scatter instantly. Apollo's scream of frustration sends birds fleeing from every tree in a 3-mile radius. Apollo's newfound tapping strategy works, until the wolves arrive. You're dozing against a sun-warmed rock when the first howl cuts through the afternoon haze. The sheep, previously scattered and lazy, snapped to attention like fuzzy little soldiers. Even Apollo, mid-complaint about his chipped nails, freezes. Mainstream historical fact: wolves were the ancient shepherd's worst nightmare, capable of decimating a flock in minutes. Protective dogs helped, but in Apollo's case? He fired the dog yesterday for looking at him funny. The first wolf slinks from the tree line, yellow eyes fixed on a plump ewe. Apollo, to his credit, doesn't hesitate. He steps forward, staff raised, radiating godly authority. "Begone," he booms, voice layered with divine command. "I am Apollo, and these are my..." The wolf lunges. What happens next is a blur of teeth, golden robes, and excessive force. Apollo doesn't just defend the flock, he obliterates. One wolf gets vaporized mid-leap, reduced to a charred outline on the grass. Another flees, only for Apollo to snipe it with a sunbeam from 30 yards. The last whimpers, pinned by his staff as he raises a hand, glowing like a miniature supernova. "Wait," you yell. Apollo pauses. The wolf pees itself. "That's enough," you say carefully, eyeing the smoking crater where wolf number 1 used to be. "They're gone." Apollo blinks, then straightens, brushing ash off his sleeves. "Right. Obviously." But his hands are shaking. Quirky tidbit: ancient shepherds believed wolves were sent by gods as punishment, ironic, since this god just invented wolf genocide. Admetus arrives at the carnage, takes one look at the scorch marks, and sighs. "I said guard them, not turn them into anxious wrecks." The sheep huddle together, trembling. One faints. Historians still argue whether this scene represents divine protection or the dangers of unchecked power. Right now, it's just awkward. That night, Apollo stares at the stars, uncharacteristically quiet. "They were going to hurt the sheep," he mutters. You nod. "And now the sheep are terrified of you." A beat. Then, grudgingly, "I might have overreacted." Outside, a lone surviving wolf howls in the distance. Apollo flinches. The morning after the wolf incident, Apollo wakes to find the sheep won't come near him. At all. They huddle at the far edge of the pasture, their usual vacant expressions replaced by something disturbingly close to awareness. The boldest ewe, the one that bit him, now flees at the slightest twitch of his fingers. Mainstream historical fact: sheep have strong fight-or-flight instincts and can recognize threats for years. Apollo, smelling of singed wolf and divine fury, might as well be wearing a danger sign. He tries everything. Gentle coaxing, ignored. Bribes, sniffed, then rejected. Even his lyre, which usually charms everything from nymphs to rocks, gets nothing but a collective sheep side eye. Defeated, he slumps against a tree. "This is ridiculous," he mutters. "I'm a god." You nod sympathetically. And they're sheep. Logic isn't their strong suit. Quirky tidbit: ancient shepherds sometimes wore the same unwashed clothing for weeks so their flock would recognize them by scent. Apollo, who changes his robes daily, and perfumes them with ambrosia-infused myrrh, might as well be a stranger. By noon, he's desperate enough to try disguising his divinity. He rubs dirt on his arms, muses his hair, and, after a dramatic pause, removes his golden armbands. "There," he grumbles. "Now I look mortal." He doesn't. He looks like a disheveled prince slumming it for a day. But the sheep, perhaps fooled or just bored of running, finally led him within 5 feet. Progress. Then disaster. A gust of wind flips his hood back, sunlight glinting off his still perfect hair. The flock bolts. Apollo groans. Historians still argue whether this myth critiques vanity or just proves sheep are the ultimate judges of character. Right now, it's both. That evening, Admetus finds Apollo scrubbing manure off his sandals, manually, for once, no magic, and pauses. "You're learning," he says, amused. Apollo scowls. "I hate this." "But you're doing it." A pause. Then, grudgingly, someone has to. Outside, the sheep bleat. For once, it doesn't sound like mockery. The days blur together in a haze of wool, dirt, and humbling realizations. Apollo's hands, once soft, manicured, fit for plucking lyre strings or drawing golden arrows, are now calloused, nicked by brambles, and permanently stained with lanolin from sheep's wool. He stares at them one morning like they belong to someone else. Mainstream historical fact: ancient shepherds used lanolin, the oil from sheep's wool, as a primitive hand balm. Apollo, who once demanded scented oils from distant lands, now rubs it into his cracked palms without thinking. Progress, or surrender? Even he isn't sure. The sheep still don't like him, but they tolerate him. Mostly. The bold ewe, now nicknamed Bitey by you, occasionally lets him scratch behind her ears, though you suspect it's just to lull him into a false sense of security before she nips his fingers again. Quirky tidbit: sheep have rectangular pupils, giving them nearly 360-degree vision. Apollo swears Bitey watches him constantly, waiting for weakness. Today's challenge: hoof trimming. Admetus drops a set of crude iron shears at Apollo's feet. "They're overdue," he says cheerfully. Apollo picks them up like they might bite. "You expect me to manicure livestock?" Admetus shrugs. "Unless you'd rather muck out the pen first?" Apollo chooses the shears. What follows is an hour of wrestling sheep into submission, dodging kicks, and enduring indignant bass. By the end, Apollo's robes are sweat-soaked, his hair full of hay, and Bitey's hooves are functional, if not aesthetically pleasing. Historians still argue whether this labor was meant to teach humility or simply prove that even gods bow to necessity. As Apollo picks straw from his mouth, it's hard to tell. That night, he collapses onto his pallet, too tired to complain. Outside, the sheep settle in their pen, content. For once, the world feels quiet. Then Bitey rams the gate, just once, for good measure. Apollo doesn't even open his eyes. "I hate you," he murmurs. It sounds almost fond. Rain. Apollo wakes to the drumming of water on the roof, a sound he usually associates with poetic melancholy, not mud. Lots of mud. The kind that sucks at sandals and splatters robes with every step. He stands in the doorway, staring at the deluge like it's a personal betrayal. Mainstream historical fact: ancient Thessaly's rainy season turned pastures into swamps, forcing shepherds to lead flocks to higher ground. Apollo, who controls the sun, is now at the mercy of weather. The irony is palpable. You toss him a sodden wool cloak. Admetus says we need to move them to the hills before the valley floods. Apollo's eye twitches. We? The sheep, at least, are thrilled. They bleat joyfully, prancing through puddles like fuzzy, brainless children. Bitey headbutts a rainwater-filled trough, then sneezes. Quirky tidbit: sheep's wool can absorb up to 30% its weight in water before feeling damp. Apollo's cloak hits 5% before he starts complaining. The trek uphill is a disaster. Sheep veer off to nibble at washed-out roots. Lambs get stuck in gullies. Apollo, slipping in his fancy sandals, finally yanks them off and goes barefoot, then immediately steps on a thistle. His scream scatters the flock in all directions. "You're supposed to watch where you step," you say, extracting spines from his foot. Apollo glares. "I don't look at the ground. The ground looks at me." By dusk, you've reclaimed most of the sheep, except one stubborn ewe who now lives in a tree, somehow. The hillside cave Admetus promised is cramped, reeks of wet wool, and echoes with the drip-drip of groundwater. Apollo sits apart, sulking, his sun power is useless against the damp. Historians still argue whether this myth reflects ancient climate shifts or just Zeus's love of slapstick. Then, Bitey plops down beside Apollo, her soggy flank pressed against his leg. He stiffens, but doesn't push her away. Outside, the rain falls. For once, no one complains. The rain doesn't stop. 3 days in the cave, and Apollo's divine patience has dissolved into restless pacing. His hair, usually gleaming, hangs limp. His robes are permanently damp. Even his lyre sounds soggy. Mainstream historical fact: prolonged rain risked hoof rot in sheep, a painful infection that could cripple a flock. Admetus warned Apollo to check their feet daily, but the god has been too busy sulking. Bitey limps toward him now, her left front hoof tender. Apollo stares at it, then at his hands, still calloused, still capable. A year ago, he would have healed her with a snap. Now? He hesitates. Quirky tidbit, ancient shepherds treated hoof rot with a paste of wine, honey, and crushed juniper. Apollo rummages through the cave's emergency supplies, muttering. Mortals do this every season? The remedy smells like a tavern floor and sticks to everything. Bitey, ever gracious, tries to kick him during application. Apollo pins her between his knees, a move he learned wrestling Hermes, and works the paste into her hoof. Stop squirming, he grumbles. I'm helping. Bitey sneezes directly into his face. By week's end, the rain breaks. Sunlight spills into the cave, and Apollo, who hasn't seen his domain in days, stumbles outside like a man reborn. The sheep bolt past him, eager for dry grass. Bitey's hoof is healed. Historians still argue whether this was a lesson in humility or simply proof that gods make terrible patients. Apollo watches the flock scatter across the meadow, then turns to you. I didn't hate that, he admits, like the words pain him. A breeze carries the scent of damp earth. Somewhere, a lamb bleats. Apollo smiles. Just a little. The seasons turn, and with them, Apollo's grudging competence. He no longer startles at pre-dawn bleating. He can spot a lame sheep from 50 paces. He even develops a system for untangling wool from brambles, a skill he'll never admit to being proud of. Mainstream historical fact, ancient shepherds marked the end of summer with a festival thanking the gods for healthy flocks. Apollo, ironically, is now the one being thanked, by mortals who still don't recognize him. Admetus visits the pasture one evening, inspecting the fattened sheep. Not bad, he says, nodding at Apollo. For a novice. Apollo's chest puffs up. Then deflates just as fast when Bitey butts his thigh, demanding scratches. Quirky tidbit, sheep have excellent memories for faces. Admetus's flocks still panic at Hermes sent from that one visit months ago. Apollo, once a stranger, is now tolerated. Mostly. But the real test comes at shearing time. The hired shearers arrive, blades glinting, and Apollo balks. You'll hurt them, he snaps, stepping between Bitey and a burly man with forearms like tree trunks. The shearer blinks. They'll overheat if we don't. Apollo hesitates. He's seen sheep panting in the sun, their thick wool a burden. Reluctantly, he steps aside, but hovers, correcting grips, fussing over nicks that never come. By dusk, the wool piles high, the sheep wobble in a new lightness, and Apollo exhales like he's been holding his breath all day. Historians still argue whether this moment represents growth or just Apollo's lingering god complex repurposed. That night, he examines a tuft of Bitey's wool, golden in the firelight. It's softer than I thought, he murmurs. You nod. Most things are. Outside, the stars will overhead, indifferent. But here, by the fire, Apollo finally stops counting the days. The first frost comes quietly, silvering the grass and stiffening the sheep's breath into little clouds. Apollo, who once commanded the very concept of seasons, now shivers like any mortal, his borrowed shepherd's cloak pulled tight around his shoulders. Mainstream historical fact, winter was the most dangerous season for ancient flocks, scarce food, lurking predators, and the ever-present threat of freezing rains. Apollo, who once toasted his toes by divine fires, now spends his mornings breaking ice from watering troughs with a rock. Bitey, ever helpful, watches him chip away, then drinks the second he turns his back, splashing frigid water onto his sandals. Apollo yelps. You, he accuses, pointing. Bitey blinks her rectangular pupils, innocent as a snowflake. Quirky tidbit, sheep grow thicker wool in winter, but ancient shepherds still bundled them into makeshift coats during storms. Apollo, grumbling, now stitches ragged blankets into lumpy sheep-sized wraps. His embroidery is creative. It's the sun, you ingrate, he snaps when Bitey tries to eat hers. The real crisis hits during a blizzard. Snow piles against the pen's gate, the sheep huddle together, their usual stupidity replaced by quiet unease. Apollo stares at the whiteout, then at his hands, still capable of summoning fire, technically. But Zeus's decree hangs over him, no godly powers. He exhales, grabs a shovel, and starts digging. Historians still argue whether this was the moment Apollo truly understood mortal struggle or just realized snow is really heavy. Either way, by dawn, the sheep have a cleared path to shelter, and Apollo has a newfound hatred of weather. Bitey noses his frozen fingers as he collapses inside. He doesn't push her away. Winter's grip lingers, but something has shifted. Apollo no longer counts the days until his servitude ends, not aloud, anyway. He moves through his tasks with quiet efficiency, mending fences, rationing feed, even learning which weeds sheep can safely nibble when the pastures lie buried. Mainstream historical fact: ancient shepherds supplemented winter diets with stored hay and fermented grains, a practice Apollo once would have dismissed as peasant work. Now, he sniffs a batch of fermenting feed, nods approvingly, and doesn't even gag. Progress. Bitey, ever the opportunist, develops a taste for Admetus's winter apple stores. Apollo catches her mid-theft, one hoof in the barrel, her muzzle dripping juice. Really? He sighs, dragging her out. She licks his face in retaliation. Quirky tidbit: sheep have no top front teeth, just a hard palate for tearing grass. This doesn't stop Bitey from gumming Apollo's sleeve like a disgruntled toddler. The thaw comes suddenly. One morning, the ice cracks like gunfire across the creek. By noon, the first brave chutes push through mud. Apollo stands at the pasture's edge, watching the sheep stumble into sunlight, their winter coats ragged. He should be elated. Instead, his chest feels oddly tight. Admetus finds him there. "Spring shearing soon," he says. Then, quieter, "Your year's nearly up." Apollo doesn't answer. Historians still argue whether this myth was about redemption or simply proving that time changes everyone, even gods. That night, Bitey curls against his legs as he repairs a torn blanket. His stitches are still crooked, but they hold. Outside, the first frog of the season croaks. Apollo smiles. The morning of Apollo's final day dawns clear and bright, too bright, he thinks, squinting at the sky like it's showing off. The sheep graze obliviously, unaware that their divine shepherd's sentence is up at sundown. Bitey, of course, chooses today to get her head stuck in a fence. Mainstream historical fact: ancient Greeks marked the end of servitude with a ceremonial washing, symbolizing the return to one's true status. Apollo, elbow-deep in lanolin and mud, hasn't been ceremonial in months. "Hold still," he mutters, prying the fence slats apart. Bitey kicks, her wool hopelessly tangled. "You couldn't have done this yesterday? When I still cared?" She bleats directly into his ear. Quirky tidbit: sheep remember kindnesses and grudges for years. Bitey will likely recall this rescue and ignore it completely next time she sees a tasty-looking fence. By midday, the flock is gathered, the pens are mended, and Apollo's satchel sits packed by the hut door. He lingers, pretending to check for forgotten items. Admetus finds him rearranging the same 3 blankets for the 10th time. "You're welcome to stay," Admetus says, grinning. "The sheep like you." Apollo scoffs. "They tolerate me." Same thing. Historians still argue whether this year was punishment or pilgrimage, whether Apollo was meant to learn humility or simply remember his own mortality. Right now, standing in a dusty hut with calloused hands, the distinction feels irrelevant. At sunset, Apollo steps onto the road, his golden armbands gleaming again. The sheep watch from the pasture. Bitey chews thoughtfully, then turns away. Apollo hesitates. Then, very quietly, "Goodbye, you woolly menace." The first stars blink awake overhead as he walks away. The road back to Olympus feels both familiar and foreign under Apollo's feet. His stride, once effortlessly graceful, now carries the slight stiffness of months spent sleeping on the ground. The golden armbands around his biceps feel heavier than he remembers. Mainstream historical fact: ancient Greek gods were believed to physically change when walking among mortals, dimming their radiance to avoid blinding humans. Now, as Apollo's divine glow returns with each step, he catches himself glancing back toward Fairy's fading silhouette. A rustle in the bushes. Apollo tenses, hand flying to an absent bough, then relaxes as a familiar, dopey-faced sheep trots into the road. Bitey stares at him, grass dangling from her mouth. Quirky tidbit: sheep have been known to follow their shepherds for miles, a behavior ancient Greeks attributed to stubbornness rather than affection. Bidey's presence here could mean either, or that she's after the apples in Apollo's pack. "Oh, now you listen?" Apollo mutters. Bidey blinks. He should shoo her back. He should summon a thunderbolt to scare her off. Instead, he sighs and tosses her an apple core. "You're terrible," he informs her as she crunches loudly. "The worst sheep." Bidey headbutts his thigh, gently this time. Historians still argue whether gods can truly change or merely play at mortality like children playing dress-up. As Apollo kneels to scratch Bidey's ears one last time, his fingers linger in her wool, no longer repulsed by its earthy scent. When he stands, the sheep doesn't follow. She watches as he turns toward Olympus, his form brightening until he's more light than man. Then, with a final snort, Bidey wanders back toward the pasture. The road ahead glows. The road behind is already fading into shadow. Apollo's return to Olympus should feel like victory. The palace gleams as always, nectar flows, muses sing, and not a single speck of dirt mars the marble floors. Yet as he steps into the throne room, the air feels thinner somehow. Less substantial. Mainstream historical fact: ancient texts describe Olympus as a place where time stands still, where gods remain forever unchanging. But Apollo's hands, still faintly calloused, remember the weight of a shepherd's staff. Hermes is the first to notice him. Well, he smirks, eyeing Apollo's sun-bleached robes. "Did you miss me?" Apollo should snap back. Should launch into a tirade about stolen cattle and divine justice. Instead, he plucks a piece of straw from Hermes' hair, left over from some recent mischief, and flicks it away. "You're insufferable." Hermes blinks. Quirky tidbit: ambrosia, the food of the gods, supposedly erases all mortal weariness. Yet Apollo finds himself setting aside his golden cup after just one sip, the taste too sweet, too weightless compared to Admetus's rough barley bread. Zeus observes from his throne, saying nothing. Historians still argue whether this entire ordeal was punishment or pilgrimage, whether Apollo was meant to be broken or remade. The answer, perhaps, is in the way Apollo now pauses at the palace edge each dawn, watching distant Thessalian hills turn gold beneath his sun, no longer just his domain, but a place he knows. That night, as the other gods feast, Apollo slips away to a quiet balcony. Somewhere far below, a shepherd tends his flock under the stars. The wind carries the faintest echo of bleating. Apollo smiles. Then, very softly, he begins to hum. The stars will overhead, gentle and unchanging, as the last echoes of our story fade into the night. Apollo's journey, from golden god to grudging shepherd and back again, reminds us that even the mightiest among us can be humbled by life's simplest lessons. Perhaps that's the real magic of myths, not their grand battles or divine feats, but the quiet moments in between, the calloused hands, the shared warmth, the stubborn sheep that leave hoofprints on our hearts. As you drift towards sleep tonight, imagine those Thessalian hills under moonlight, where mortal and divine once walked the same dusty paths. Picture Bidey, dozing in her pasture, dreaming of stolen apples and sun-warmed grass. And know that somewhere between waking and dreams, between gods and sheep and all the ordinary wonders in between, there's a story waiting just for you, soft as wool, bright as dawn, and as endless as the sky. Breathe deep. Let go. The stars will keep watch until morning. End of script. Sweet dreams.